I hope that I've given you a deeper sense of appreciation of certain body parts of your own. I hope that you'll stop worrying about male pattern hair loss and you'll start feeling more appreciative of your zona fasciculata. Because, you know, when was the last time you wrote or called or sent an I love you card to your zona fasciculata? It's made you what it is today. I don't think anybody ever got into medical school without a good zona fasciculata. As a matter of fact, if I had my way, I'd skip interviews for all the medical students. And why bother interviewing? What do you find out in a 20-minute interview? Screening for psychosis? I'd do something like this instead. Can I have a urine sample for cortisol? I think that's much better. Nobody ever went to medical school without a good fasciculata. Oh, here they are. Wow, here we go. Here's the zona glomerulosa, and here's the G, and here's the F fasciculata, and here's the reticularis. Ooh, yeah. GFR, like a milliliter filtration rate. Whew, there it is. Now, what makes a glomerulosa a glomerulosa? What makes each of these their different identity? When you have an organ, I'm not even sure if you can call it an organ, do you know that the whole thing is like 10 grams? It's 28 grams to the ounce. The whole thing on top of your adrenals, 10 grams? Tiny. Do you know that's a tablespoon? Well, basically, just about a tablespoon. 1 tablespoon worth of adrenal glands is what you're living off of? Wow. Oh. And then in these zones, what makes a different zone a zone is the enzymes that are there, not the anatomic location. If I took the enzymes in the glomerulosa and I put those enzymes in the fasciculata, then it becomes a glomerulosa. If I took the enzymes and I put them and mixed them around, well, it's kind of like having a big classroom, and you could put the law school guy teacher in there, put the med school teacher in there, put the art teacher in there next day. It's like, it's not the location, it's what are the enzymes that you have there. So it's kind of like having a multi-purpose classroom. Whatever you put there is presenting as the information. Well, in that case, it is a med school, law school, an art school, history school, music school. Music might be a little bit different because there's actually apparatus there. But in terms of the content of what each zone is, it's based on its enzymes, not its anatomy. It's based on its enzymes, not its anatomy. Now, once more from the top with feeling. Now, I already see what you're doing out there. You're thinking that maybe you could pass without needing to know this, because you just looked at this table, at this diagram, and you just had the feeling of, it's too much, I can't, it's too big, I can't, I'm not ready. And I understand. And I'll tell you something, you can pass without needing to know this. You can. But you can't do really well without knowing it. You can. You can pass. But we're not here to pass. We're here to kick ass. Right? So, from the top, let's look at these things. The first thing, LDL. Oh, Ernest Hemingway, right? As I bit into the peach with its ripe juiceness, and as the juice and the taste of it spilled down my chin, and followed it by the taste of the fresh, reviving vodka, which went through, and the white wine. Well, you know what that is? The LDL is a movable feast. Hemingway, right? It's a movable feast. Now, I know you think LDL is bad, but you know, LDL is like the dessert wagon that goes through where people come through with things, and you come by the table and you say, hi, would you like a little espresso? That would be the medulla. Would you like a little espresso? Baklava, chocolate, decaffeinated. Would you like a little ice cream? It's like the dessert wagon. And it's a movable feast going right through the blood vessels near every cell in the body. And each cell will reach in and grab what it needs to make things. Now, LDL, I know we think of it as bad because of coronary artery disease, and too much LDL is bad. But the too much LDL is basically a phenomenon of really, seriously, the last 100 years. The last 100 years. Prior to the last 100 years, the amount of meat consumption on the planet was so much smaller that do you know that the first description of a myocardial infarction is barely 100 years old? Sir William Osler, who started residencies in this country, said, I had been in practice and a fellow for many years before I first saw a case of coronary artery disease, a very rare disease. And why is that? Because LDL levels used to be very low because we didn't eat red meat. Remember, we are not carnivores by any stretch. We are not even omnivores. We, my fellow humans, we are herbivores masquerading as omnivores and carnivores. Ready? Carnivores have short, sharp, ripping teeth. Herbivores have multiple flat, grinding, smashy teeth. Which do we have, Dracula? We got two incisors and not even that good. Okay? So, teeth-wise, we're herbivores. Next, carnivores have short loops of bowel, short GI tracts because they don't need much time to digest the meat. Herbivores have long GI tracts. Which do we have? Well, ours is long. You might go, well, I don't know, mine's about average. Well, gosh, you're used to it. But you've got 30 feet of small bowel. That's not small. We're herbivores. And the reason that we die of coronary disease is we were never meant to have that meat. We were never meant to have that high in LDL. The LDL is the movable feast that travels by each cell. Why, it's like one night, one warm and moist night, Sir Percival came to a mysterious castle, and he saw there an injured man, a king lying maimed at the front of the room. Now Percival had been taught at the court of Arthur to not speak lest he be thought a fool by the other knights. So as he was watching the maimed king, he had the urge to say, "What ails thee, sire?" But he did not speak for fear of being criticized. And at that moment, the room darkened and a maiden appeared carrying a large bowl. And this was the Holy Grail, followed by a man carrying the spear of Longinus who pierced the side of the man on the cross. And each man, as the Grail came by, reached into the Grail and was fed with that thing which he loved most in the world. So LDL is a movable feast wherein each cell reaches in and is fed by the thing it loves most in the world. And in this case, if you didn't have cholesterol, you'd be dead today. Because if you didn't have cholesterol, you can't have aldosterone, you can't have testosterone, you can't have estrogen, you can't have any of the steroid hormones. Aldosterone, testosterone, progesterone. Well, I feel like I'm in an Italian deli. What would you like? I'll have a half a pound of progesterone. Are you for gestation? Yes. You sure you're not anti-gestation? No, I'm for gestation. Oh, in that case, you could say you're progesterone. Correct. That's where the word gets. Progesterone. It helps gestation. Oh. Prolactin. Helps lactation. Oh. Go ahead, say it. Come on. Oh. The LDL is the movable feast that goes by your cells. And each cell reaches in and grabs that which it loves most in the world. And you know what happens to Percival at the end? Because he does not ask the question from his compassion, "What ails thee, sire? What is your injury? What ails thee, sire? And whom does the Grail serve?" He instantly finds himself woken up. The castle has disappeared. The maimed king has disappeared, the rich Fischer king. The wasteland is not healed, and he has to restart the quest for the Holy Grail all the way from the beginning because he did not ask the question stemming from his compassion. And that's the beginning of the Holy Grail legends. Now, the LDL. Whom does the LDL serve? It serves the steroid nucleus that you need in your adrenal glands. Big time. It serves other forms of happiness that you like your ovaries, okay, and your testicles. Now, what's the acetate thing here for? Acetate is a way of making cholesterol de novo, from new, de novo. In other words, let's say that you were in a malnourished state, because remember, the human body is set up to be able to be malnourished. Part of the reason we get fat, part of the reason that we balloon up like that, is because we're set up for long periods of starvation. And the way we're set up for long periods of starvation is, hey, you don't have any cholesterol? Well, we have acetate here. We have acetate you can make your cholesterol from. We're set up for long periods of starvation because the idea is that when you did have food, you would eat, store, because maybe you're going to go the next 5 to 10 days without eating. So that's why. You see, the very genetic thing that ensured our survival, let me tell you something. Our ancestors that did not get fat, they're not the ones who are our ancestors. You know why? Because they died. The reason that we survived is because in between periods of being able to eat, you had fattened up so that you can get thin later on. The same thing with short attention spans. Look on the bright side. You're worried because you don't have a good attention span for paying attention to things like the adrenal cortex. You're worried that you don't have a long attention span? By the way, do you know what I just said? Well, the whole point is, attention deficit disorder is a survival benefit. You see, a guy who's out there eating in the woods or something, and the dinosaur is coming to eat him, and he hears the leaves rustling, and he doesn't lose attention, and he goes like that. If he doesn't go like this, hey, what's that? And goes, bing, and runs away. Attention deficit allowed you to survive. If you're out there in the woods somewhere, and the dinosaur is coming to eat you, and you go, I'm focused, don't bother me, I'm focused. That guy, he's not our ancestor because he was human cordon bleu about 18 million years ago. He was lunch for a Tyrannosaurus. So I'm trying to tell you that attention deficit disorder is a survival advantage. Now, if you don't have cholesterol, you have the way to make it out of acetate fresh. And desmolase is the initial step. Desmolase is the initial step here. Desmolase is the enzyme. Remember, ACE is enzyme. Don't mistake it with hormone. Desmolase starts the step at the beginning. Now, part of the reason that we're not going to worry about some of these things, let's change our colors on the old pointer here. Let's look at the colors. I'm going to do something very interesting. You ready? You see this thing here? Pregnenolone. Watch, 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 watch. Goodbye. Goodbye. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, goodbye. Progesterone, I'm afraid you really got to die. Da 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 da. Hydroxy, progesterone, hydroxypregnenolone. Leave me alone. I don't want to learn you today. Wow, look at that. The fish just simplified your life. First of all, what I have just done is I have just taken out, look at this. I want you not to learn the names of those. Wow, this is pretty nifty, being able to black out things with this pointer is great. So this is fantastic. You know why? I have just shortened up this whole thing for you. What it just made it out for you is you don't have to learn the names of the intervening steps. Did you know that? Where in your body has a pregnenolone receptor? Come on. Come on. I'm not going to go anywhere unless you tell me. Okay, there isn't any. Where in your body has a 17-hydroxypregnenolone receptor? Come on, come on. Let me see your receptor. Come on now. Come on, come on. And the answer is there isn't any. You know what they are? They're intervening steps. They are things that the hormones pass through. They don't circulate, and there's no tissue receptor. They're intervening steps. They're like my opinion about the 80s. Intervening steps. I would have had that 270s and go straight into the 90s. So the thing is that those are intervening steps that are not necessary for you to learn. Now, ready? What do we have here? Is we have these enzymes here which matter. 21-hydroxylase, 11-hydroxylase. And you'll notice it's the same 21-hydroxylase there, and it's the same 21-hydroxylase here. 11-hydroxylase there. Okay, so what we have here is we basically have shortened this down to just a couple of things for you to know. You have to basically know that over here in the first column, in aldosterone, aldosterone is only made in the glomerulosa. And why? Because only the glomerulosa has aldosterone synthase. Only the glomerulosa has aldosterone synthase, which would work here to make aldosterone. Number 2, see the 17-hydroxylase here, 17-hydroxylase? Well, the 17-hydroxylase does not exist in the glomerulosa. The 17-hydroxylase does not exist in the glomerulosa. That's why you can't make cortisol in the glomerulosa, because the glomerulosa does not have 17-hydroxylase. Okay, the glomerulosa does not have 17-hydroxylase. That's why here, let's see this top, okay, these zones here, let's make a line, there's a glomerulosa. There's our glomerulosa, only here. That means this thing, the 17-hydroxylase, does not exist in the glomerulosa, does not exist in the glomerulosa, does not exist in the glomerulosa, and that's why you can't make a 17-hydroxy steroid in the glomerulosa, because the 17-hydroxylase is not there. The 17-hydroxylase is not in the glomerulosa, so I can't make a 17-hydroxy steroid in the glomerulosa. Now, 21-hydroxylase, 17-hydroxylase, 11-hydroxylase. Ready? I understand. I feel like you do. I know. You'll see. It's not as hard as it looks. They mean what's attached to carbon 17. I'm putting a hydroxyl group, OH, onto carbon 17. Now, I know it sounds hard, but you see this down here on the bottom where it's 21 carbons? Now, all of the enzymes and hormones in the glomerulosa and the fasciculata have 21 carbons. It's 21 carbons, and you make adjustments at the different carbons. 17-hydroxylase puts a hydroxyl group on carbon 17. 11-hydroxylase puts a hydroxyl group on carbon 11. Yes, you understand? I understand. 21-hydroxylase, hydroxyl group on carbon 21. But they all have 21 carbons in the glomerulosa and the fasciculata. Okay. Now, what makes a zone? The presence of the different enzymes. Aldosterone synthase is only in the glomerulosa, so only the glomerulosa can make aldosterone. 17-hydroxylase is not in the glomerulosa, so 17-hydroxylase, you can't make cortisol in the zona glomerulosa. I just basically said that the only important 17-hydroxy steroid is cortisol. So out of this whole thing, the only one you have to learn is cortisol. The only thing that's good as a product of the zona fasciculata is cortisol. What's the difference between cortisol and a glucocorticoid? Nothing. Cortisol is the only endogenous true glucocorticoid. The reticularis, when you see the term 17-keto steroid, 17-keto steroid is the same thing as saying adrenal androgen. It has a keto group at position 17. It doesn't mean there's 17 carbons. It means a keto group. Now, the other part of it is, although it's here in the picture, testosterone and estrogen are not made in the adrenal. Testosterone and estrogen are not made in the adrenal because the adrenal gland lacks the aromatase that you need to make estrogen. What makes you a woman besides the X chromosomes and the ability to ask for directions and keep the house clean? What makes you a woman besides a sense of not being threatened by men who are taller than you? The answer is aromatase. If I took aromatase and put it in the adrenal gland, I can have the adrenal gland make estrogen. If I took the enzyme that make testosterone out of the testicles and injected it into the adrenal gland, let's say you're the kind of person that you want to have experiments with small furry animals, and I take those enzymes out of the gonads and I put them in the adrenal gland, you can have the adrenal gland make testosterone or make estrogen, depending if you add those enzymes in. So I want to be clear about it. These things here, which I'm going to now circle again, these things here are not here to show you that they're occurring in the adrenal. This is not occurring in the adrenal. That's not occurring in the adrenal. It's there to show you that all of the steps of the whole pathway that you see here, with the exception, of course, of making aldosterone, are present in the ovary and the testicle. But in addition, you have aromatase. Let me get that again. The enzymes that make estrogen and testosterone are present in the gonads in addition to all the other enzymes that are present in the adrenal. The gonad doesn't skip 17 hydroxylase. The gonad doesn't skip the 21 hydroxylase. The gonad doesn't skip the 11 hydroxylase. The gonad has all of these things and has aromatase on top of it, which the adrenal gland doesn't. Again, the adrenal gland doesn't make testosterone and estrogen because it's missing the final step. That's why. 21 carbon steroids is everything in the glomerulosa and the fasciculata. 19 carbon steroids is the adrenal androgens. When you take one rib off of the male sex hormone, let me get this. Let me think, see if anything is suggestible here. When I take one rib off of the 19 carbons for testosterone, I make estrogen. So if I snap off one rib from the male sex hormone, testosterone, I get the female, the woman sex hormone. So if I remove one rib from the man, I create woman. Wow. I am so deep. Now, in looking at this slide of metabolism of cortisol, we have to see here is that cortisol is not excreted directly into the urine because cortisol is on its binding globulin. Binding globulin. Just also remember that the word globulin means protein. Don't get hung up, man. It's like Homer Simpson. Don't have a cow, Dad. So it's a binding globulin. So when the cortisol on its binding globulin goes near the kidney, it's not going to go off into the urine until it's sugar-coated, comes off the binding globulin, then it will go in the urine. It gets candy-coated. Just a spoonful of sugar makes the cortisol go down, the cortisol go down. Yes, so it is the candy coating, the spoonful of sugar around the cortisol that makes the cortisol come off its binding globulin and go into the urine. Candy coating in medical doctor speak is called glucuronidation. Candy coating, glucuronidation conjugated. And that makes it go into the urine. Now, this is a very important thing because that's how we're able to monitor levels of cortisol output by looking at the 24-hour urine cortisol. Now, urinary excretion. 17-ketosteroid means a keto group at position 17. Tells us what is the function of the zona reticularis. Now also, remember that the androgens, they have to come off of their binding globulins and go into the urine. That usually means a bit of candy coating. So urinary 17-ketosteroid levels can be used to monitor the level of adrenal androgens. Now, the other part of it is that when you use those 17-ketosteroids to tell you how well your adrenal is functioning. Now, the other part of it is that even in a person who is post-pubertal, isn't it amazing how much of your androgens are still coming out of your adrenal? It's amazing. Look at this. 2/3 adrenal, 1/3 testicular, even post-pubertal. Wow. So remember how we said before, mineralocorticoid means aldosterone, means sodium, means zona glomerulosa. Here in the zona reticularis means androgens, means adrenal androgens, which is not testosterone, means 17 ketosteroids. Yeah, I understand, but they mean the same thing. 17 keto steroids, zona reticularis, adrenal androgens. Thank you very much. Now, let's take each of these zones and go through them one by one. Now, that's one of the things that's going to be interesting about your note set. Your note set basically is quite repetitious on the adrenal. And I want you to understand that the note set is repetitious on adrenal because for step 1 students, I know that there are many people who are looking at this now that have fundamentally never really studied this before. You avoided it, you didn't do it, you skipped it. So I know I said all this before. So the great news is you have the option of fast forwarding. Done. No. But the other thing is that a slice, the glomerulosa, the word glomerulosa has to do with histologic appearance. It doesn't mean there's any relationship to a glomerulus. It doesn't relate to a glomerulus. Here at the top, LDL is how we derive the cholesterol, which is how we start to make the intervening steps. There is no pregnenolone receptor, so you ready? Gone, pregnenolone. There is no progesterone receptor, at least not in the non-pregnant woman that we care about. So in the adrenal, progesterone is not circulating. In the adrenal, the progesterone is not circulating. It's an intervening step. Now, this step here, 11-deoxycorticosterone, this is important, 11-doc. Now, a reason why 11-doc is so important is because 11-doc, 11-deoxycorticosterone, because it acts as a weak version of aldosterone. Weak, but it's enough to keep you alive. Weak, but it's enough to keep you alive. This is a very important point because it means that if you somehow lose your aldosterone, if you have 11-doc, it'll keep you alive. Now, if you have zero 11-deoxycorticosterone and zero aldosterone, you're going to die. Wow, that's bad death. Now, look at the top here, and we see angiotensin 2, and over here, angiotensin 2. It's the two major sites, which is here, and the other major site over here, that the angiotensin 2 has its effect. Angiotensin 2 is getting the adrenal started in the glomerulus at the top. It's tickling the desmolase. That's the other part here, is it's tickling the desmolase. Angiotensin 2 is tickling the desmolase to get this party started. And it's also tickling down here to get the aldosterone synthase started as well. Alrighty-dighty. Zona glomerulosa. Angiotensin 2 and potassium. Angiotensin 2 and potassium. Why would I want potassium to be controlling this? Do you remember what we said the effect of aldosterone is on potassium? Aldosterone will increase potassium or aldosterone will decrease potassium? Aldosterone will decrease potassium. Aldosterone makes you absorb sodium and excrete potassium. Aldosterone makes you absorb sodium and excrete potassium. So if you have a high potassium, aldosterone will get rid of it. My potassium level's going up, I'm going to die. Make some aldosterone, get rid of it. My blood pressure is low, I'm going to die. Make some angiotensin 2 so I can raise the blood pressure. The first effect of angiotensin 2, very quickly, vasospastic. The longer effect is its effect on aldosterone. Ooh, that's cool. The enzymes here that are in the middle that are so important, 21-hydroxylase. 21-hydroxylase allows the production of 11-doc. And if you have 11-doc, you'll stay alive. If you were 100% deficient in 21-beta-hydroxylase, if you were 100% deficient, if you were 100% deficient in that enzyme, if you were 100% deficient in 21-beta-hydroxylase, you would not be listening to me right now because you would be dead. So when we say 21 hydroxylase deficiencies, we really mean partial deficiencies. Partial deficiencies. Okay? How come aldosterone doesn't get made in the other parts of the body? Because the other parts of the body don't have the angiotensin II receptor and don't have the aldosterone synthase that you need to make it. Next slide. Oh my God, this same slide again. You got to be kidding me again? Yeah. Now don't get worried. Don't get panicky here, because we're saying the version the same thing. The pituitary is making ACTH. ACTH controls fasciculata and ACTH controls reticularis. It gets started by opening up the project with desmolase at the beginning. Now this part over here is the part we just said, so we're not even going to pay attention to that part because that's the part we just said in the last slide, so forget about that. But these two things here are to show us that we have, well, forget about this one. This is an intervening step. It's an intervening step. The only thing that 17-hydroxyprogesterone is good for here in this intervening step, the only thing that 17-hydroxyprogesterone is good is it never functions. 17-hydroxyprogesterone does not circulate. 17-hydroxyprogesterone has no receptor. 17-hydroxyprogesterone has one purpose and one purpose only for us. It is a diagnostic test. It is a diagnostic test for enzyme deficiencies. If you are deficient in 21-hydroxylase, what will happen to your 17-hydroxyprogesterone level? If you are deficient in 21-hydroxylase, what will happen if you're deficient here in 21-hydroxylase? What will happen to your level of 17-hydroxyprogesterone? The answer is it will go up because it gets backed up. So 17-hydroxyprogesterone is a diagnostic test to detect the presence of congenital adrenal hyperplasia. What else is a 17-hydroxy steroid besides cortisol that we measure? And the answer is nothing. The only meaningful 17-hydroxy steroid is cortisol. Cortisol controls glucose, so glucocorticoid. The adrenal androgens, we have two. DHEA, dehydroepiandrosterone, and androstenedione, DHEA and A. Now let's look at this other enzyme over here, lyase. 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 I bet you don't hear that word a lot. Lyase. Lyase? What the hell does that do? Lyase means getting a trim, getting a haircut. The lyase cuts the carbons, snaps the carbons. It snaps off carbon 20 from carbon 17. What do you mean 17 to 20? Wouldn't it be like carbon 18 attached to carbon 17? And carbon 19, the carbon 19 is attached to the carbon 18 bone, and the carbon 20 bones attached to the carbon 19 bone. Yeah, you'd think that, right? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like sequence. I'm embarrassed to say it turns out that carbon 20 is attached to carbon 17. Painful, isn't it? Yeah. So the thing is this. 21 minus 2 equals, take your time. Okay, it's 19. Ready? Glomerulosa and fasciculata have 21 carbons in their nucleus. If you take off 2 carbons, you make the 19 carbon steroids, which are adrenal androgens. The 19 carbon steroids are the adrenal androgens. When you have an enzyme that snaps off carbons 20 and 21, carbons 20 and 21, that's 1720 lyase. Because carbon 20 is attached to 17, and I want to cut off carbon 20 and 21 to make it a 19 carbon thing. So, 1720 lyase. That only exists in the reticularis. Now, what we see here is that cortisol is acting as feedback inhibition on the pituitary. See this acting as feedback inhibition on the pituitary? What else will act as feedback inhibition on the pituitary besides cortisol? What else will act as feedback inhibition on the pituitary besides cortisol? Cortisol's inhibiting ACTH. What else will do that? Nothing. The only feedback inhibition on ACTH is cortisol. The only feedback inhibition on ACTH is cortisol. That's the only one. There is no other feedback inhibition on ACTH. That's the only one. Now, this is very important. Every time the cortisol level is low, what will happen to the ACTH level? Will go up or down. Cortisol is feedback inhibition on the ACTH. Cortisol shuts off ACTH production. Making a lot of cortisol, pituitary, I'm cool, stay cool, no more ACTH, hey, I'm cool, baby. Cortisol level goes down, ACTH level will go up. Those follow together. Those follow together. The only significant 17-hydroxy steroid is cortisol. There are two 17 keto steroids, DHEA and A. Although there's 17 keto, they have 19 carbons. In order to make an adrenal androgen, you have to snap off 2 carbons. Carbon 20 is attached to carbon 17. So carbon 17, 20 lyase snaps off that 2 carbons. We're going good. We're doing good.